All right, for chapter three, the title of the chapter is "Planning Nutritious Diets," and so the question becomes: how do we know what is nutritious, and how much energy it's going to give to us, what benefits that particular food has for us, and so we need to kind of look at, in order to be able to plan a nutritious diet, we need to kind of look at some factors that go into overall nutrients. Now, coming up soon, we're going to be looking at different categories of nutrients. We'll start with macronutrients like carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, or fats. We'll look at some of the micronutrients, things like vitamins and minerals, and kind of look at how they play their main role in our overall health and nutrition. And so we're going to start out looking at maybe a kind of a question is, have you ever thought about how much nutrients, how many nutrients do we need really to survive? How many nutrients do we have to have in order to have and maintain a a desired healthy level? And so this chapter kind of goes over some scientifically researched areas, and so we're going to hit some of this, and this is kind of one of them: nutrient requirement. It's the smallest amount of that particular nutrient that's going to help us maintain that, defined level of nutritional health. I know that's kind of a broad type of a definition. Um, and so there's a lot of variables, a lot of factors that kind of go into using this definition. One thing to think about is, how much of a nutrient do we need? Well, we need at least enough to make sure that we don't have any kind of nutrient deficiency disease. And so if you don't have enough, especially like vitamins, if you don't have enough of a particular vitamin, you may, or mineral, you may have a particular deficiency. And that goes for the macronutrients as well, like proteins. If you're not getting enough protein in your diet, if you're not getting enough fats or carbs in your diet. But you see that probably more commonly with things like not getting enough of a particular mineral or vitamin. Um, and of course, everybody's a little bit different. So that nutrient requirement is, again, it's kind of a broad definition, but think about it may be different based on what the age group you're talking about. Are you looking at, early childhood development versus middle age adults, females, males, their general health status, whether they're, actively physically active, or they're not very actively active, physically active. um, uh, Other growth factors. Are they adolescent and or young adults, and they're going through growth periods still, or are they pregnant, and there's a lot of demand on body resources. So there's really a lot of different factors. Are they an older group, senior group? Are they on some kind of medication for a particular disease or disorder or problem? And so there's a lot of things that go into trying to find out what the correct um, nutrient requirement would be. So to try to look at some of that, um, researchers, scientists have put together, and this again is kind of a dynamic, it's kind of a changing type area of science, because more studies are being done, um, you know, all the time. And so there's more data that's coming in, but they've put together a list of what they called dietary reference intakes. These are just reference values to kind of look at different levels of nutrients. And so we may not look at all of these. There's about 6 or 7 here. We'll look at some of these that you see more often. So let's kind of look at the first couple here. The estimated average requirement, and each one is going to have some type of little abbreviation there, versus the recommended dietary allowance. The second one is probably used more, or seen more than the first one, but we'll mention this first one. Estimated average requirements, kind of book definition says it's the daily amount, so it's on a daily basis. How much of a particular nutrient that a person would need on a daily basis, that would meet the needs of about half the population, 50% of the healthy people. So In the figure from the book here, you have a bell-shaped curve, and so right in the middle of that bell-shaped curve, you've got the average mark, and that's what average is here in the name. The estimated, it's an estimate, um, average requirement. How much of a particular nutrient would satisfy the dietary needs of roughly half the population? All right, that's what this value is telling us. Um, in other words, if you had a particular nutrient you're looking at, or such as protein, how much protein, would satisfy half the population, and that's a good starting place. But you may have some individuals in this population that need more protein, and for whatever reason, maybe they're going through that growth spurt or growth phase, or they're pregnant, or they're an athlete, or whatever, they need more. But you got some that's over, it may they may need less, they can use less, um and so this is just an average. A lot of times what you see is the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance, the how much is required to meet the nutrient needs of just about everybody in the population. And so that's way up here on the end of the bell-shaped curve, 97, 98%. That covers just about everybody. Of course, there's going to be some people that may need more of a particular nutrient based on their overall health status and current status. Maybe they have a particular disorder or a dietary problem, and they may have to have an additional amount. But in general, this is the guidelines that you're going to see. How much protein do you need? Well, it's going to be based on an RDA value. How much carbohydrate should you be getting, or how much vitamin C should you be getting? It should be based, you'll see this based on the RDA. Now, this is, if you've seen a nutrient, just about everybody has a nutrient label on a food package, you'll see a percent daily value. And that's basically where this is coming from, is getting this information translated over to a percentage basis on that food package, okay? So for example, the estimated average requirement for something like vitamin C is only about 30 milligrams. And that would be satisfactory for roughly half the population. But the recommended dietary allowance, the RDA for vitamin C, ranges about 75 to 90 milligrams, and that would be what, on a daily basis, how much vitamin C that was satisfy the population, 97 and 98% of the population. All right, so let's look at two other dietary reference intakes, something called tolerable upper intake level and then adequate intake. The upper level, UL, as you can imagine, you can have too much of anything, right, in the body. And so this is kind of the maximum amount of a particular nutrient that is recommended. So the book definition, highest average amount of a nutrient that is unlikely to be harmful when consumed daily. Again, these numbers, these amounts would be based on a daily intake. And so, in other words, for the UL, you can kind of see on the graph for the figure here, the UL is a particular value that they feel that is the maximum amount of a nutrient that you should consume on a daily basis. Beyond that or above that, it potentially could have toxic side effects. It could actually be problematic for our cells or particular organs. Usually you see this more, it could apply to any nutrient, but usually you see this applied more to things like, vitamins and minerals. How much vitamin C is too much to take, or how much potassium or how much sodium is too much to take. That's kind of what this is, or too much in our diet. That's kind of what this is looking at. So for example, looking at the example of vitamin C, it has, we think of vitamin C as being very healthy and very safe, and it is, but it does also have an upper level, an upper limit. And based on the dietary reference intakes, the upper limit or level for vitamin C is around 2,000 milligrams. And so if you're taking more than 2,000, it doesn't mean that it's going to be poisonous, but it does mean or suggest that there is a risk that it may be toxic to our cells, or have some problem inside the body. Adequate intake a lot of times is used almost interchangeably with the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance here, but it's really reserved for certain nutrients, and again, it's usually either vitamin or mineral, certain nutrients that that there's really just not enough information about to establish an actual number. This is more of a range or just a recommendation here. So so for things like vitamin K, these are some of the more common ones that have an AI, an adequate intake estimation. Vitamin K, potassium fluoride, there is no real definitive study that suggests what the recommended amount of these are, and so they just kind of give you an estimated range. Another one we'll look at, acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. This is kind of a range of macronutrients. So we're looking at carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and kind of the range of where and how they contribute to our overall really caloric value or energy levels, to making sure that we have the adequate amount so that we're not running the risk of diet-related chronic diseases. So for example, carbohydrates, they recommend the acceptable range to be somewhere between 45 and 65% of our caloric intake should be carbohydrates. Well, how does that relate to chronic diseases? Well, there's some research studies that suggest if our carbohydrate intake is much higher than this, beyond that 65%, so in other words, we're getting over 65% of our calories from carbohydrates in our diet, that potentially could lead to things like diabetes or problems with insulin or carbohydrates. For proteins, that amount is lower, 10 to 35%. Fats, 20 to 35%. What types of things? What types of chronic diseases might be related to fats? Usually that points in the area of cardiovascular. And so, if your fat intake is, and this, includes total fat, if your total fat intake is greater than 35%, that may put you at a higher risk of developing some type of chronic disease. And again, usually it's in the cardiovascular range. All right, section 2 looks at some of the major food groups, and these are going to be very familiar to most of you: grains, dairy products, proteins, and protein-rich foods, fruits, and vegetables. And so we'll kind of go through kind of what these are, where you're going to find some of these. Grains basically are made from things like wheat or rice, or oats or barley or rye, different types of plant products here. And really the main macronutrients that they contain in a higher abundance would be carbohydrates and protein. Now, there's a couple of vocab words here I want you to kind of look at. So many things do require some kind of processing, including grains. So any type of processing of that grain. So you harvest the grain, let's say if you're talking about wheat, you harvest that kernel of wheat, and it has like an outer shell or casing on the outside. If you refine that, you're just getting the inner portion of that grain. That's how you make white wheat flour. That you may have white, just plain white bread versus whole wheat bread or wheat bread. That is more of a grain bread, right? You have white rice versus brown rice, and so if you are refining, if you're getting the white rice or the white wheat type of a bread, that just means that those grains have been refined. What happens in that process, though, of that refining process, is that some of the very valuable, important nutrients can be lost in that process. And so sometimes grains are enriched. The enrichment process means that they've undergone some kind of refinement. They've lost some nutrients, but the enrichment process means they've added those nutrients back into that particular product. So next time you're buying, wheat products or rice products or oats, look to see if it says anything about enrichment. Usually they're enriched with things like iron, because again, unless it's whole wheat, that outer layer that gets refined and removed off usually has iron and certain B vitamins that are there. And so a lot of times to try to replace that nutrition, they'll add those after the processing. Along with that, sometimes you see the word fortification. Fortification is anytime a particular nutrient is added to a food, which is a little different than enrichment. Enrichment means that the nutrients used to be there, they used to be part of that food, and then they were lost during the processing, refining process. Whereas fortification means that nutrient wasn't naturally present in that food source, and they've added it, artificially to that. So sometimes you see orange juice. If you go look on the in the area for orange juice, you'll see that it has been fortified with certain minerals or certain vitamins, and so they may have added extra vitamin D to the orange juice, or they may have added calcium to orange juice that wasn't normally part of it. So that's a fortification process. It's not like it once had it and it lost it. It just means they've added it to that food source. Dairy products, number 2. This is, of course, milk, yogurts, and cheese. Very good sources of these minerals: calcium, protein, phosphorus, riboflavin as a vitamin source. Make a note here that things, even though they have dairy in them, such as cream cheese and cream and butter, they generally don't, nutritionists don't include those in this particular category, even though they do have, the dairy present, only because they're very high in fat, and there's really very little calcium, if any, that's part of this. So the dairy product category is really limited to things like milk, yogurt, and cheese. Protein, any kind of meat, animal meat product, of course, will have protein there, protein-rich food there: beef, pork, lamb, fish, shellfish, all kinds of meat products, poultry, chicken, turkey. But you obviously also find protein-rich foods in beans, legumes, peas, eggs, nuts, and seeds. And you get very good sources of iron. These particular minerals, iron and zinc, and then especially B vitamins. B vitamins are very important for our overall metabolism and energy for the body. And so we'll look at these a little closer in some later chapters to kind of find out, why does the body need iron? What is zinc good for? We'll look at some things about the different vitamins. Fruits, of course, that includes all kinds of things. Of course, fresh fruits. You can have dried fruits, frozen fruits that are, in a sauce, such as applesauce. You have fruits in a can, fruit juice, and so there's different ways to ingest and enjoy some fruits. You do have to watch out, though, for some of these preparations that, if you're really trying to stay healthy, canned fruits a lot of times will have a lot of added sugar to it. Same thing about fruit juices. It's a little misleading. I'm drinking apple juice or orange juice, and I feel like I'm doing a great job. But if I look on the side of the nutrient label, you may find that there's a lot of added sugar to that. I like cranberry juice. Cranberry juice can be healthy, but because the cranberries, are kind of tart, they generally add a lot of, or a decent amount of sugar, or an artificial sweetener sometimes. So you do have to be a little careful about how you're eating the fruits. Sauces, sauced fruits, applesauce, again, can have a lot of sugar to it potentially. So just kind of look out for those things. Of course, fruits are great sources for plant chemicals, phytochemicals, potassium, folate or folic acid, and then vitamin C, very good source there. And generally, anytime we can have the whole fruit, sliced fruit is better than the juices, and that's because sometimes people eat apples, but they take the skin off. Well, the skin has a lot of fiber there, and so anytime we have the actual fruit fibers themselves, that's even better. You're not going to find that in a juice. Next category, vegetables. Lots of different ways. Again, you can get vegetables, fresh vegetables, cooked vegetables, canned, frozen, whether they've been dried or dehydrated. You can have vegetable juice, or you can make soups out of vegetable juice. That's great to do. Again, there are some things here that you do have to look out for. So, for example, if it's a canned vegetable, what do you have to look for? Well, they are probably going to have some preservatives. That preservative may be salt, and so they may have added extra sodium to those cans that we're trying to watch out for. Sometimes it's better to get frozen instead of canned, and then you can then have control over how much seasoning or what types of seasoning that you add to it. And so just kind of be aware of that. Cooked vegetables, we'll talk about this in other chapters, but cooked vegetables, sometimes we have to be careful about how we prepare vegetable. So for example, if you're cooking, I don't know, something like carrots, right? And you're boiling them in water, then, and you're not, you're throwing the water out, then sometimes you're cooking out those nutrients that you wanted to be part of your diet. And so it might be better to steam the vegetables, or to microwave the vegetables, or to eat them fresh, or eat them raw. So just kind of think about those things. Vegetables, of course, micronutrients. Those are your vitamins and minerals. Fiber, plant source fiber is excellent, and then plant chemicals that help us. Sterols are important plant chemical there. Last couple of things we'll kind of look at, just some guidelines. Every 5 years, there is a publication made called the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, and it won't be too long, and we'll be getting a new updated version. But these are just some guidelines to consider as we're planning nutritious meals. And so guideline number 1, follow a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage. One thing we have to realize is we do have different life stages. And so what is a healthy dietary pattern for a middle-aged adult is going to look different than what one is for a toddler or an infant or a senior adult. And so you really have to kind of look at that life stage to find out what is the appropriate healthy dietary pattern. And so what we need to do is try to balance, again, those nutrient-dense foods versus the energy-dense type foods. And really, it is a reflection of our personal preferences. Not everybody likes certain types of foods. Not everybody has a taste for fish or meat products or certain types of fruits. Our cultural background, our cultural traditions. Not everyone is going to be able to eat pork, and that's fine. You can find protein sources other places. And so our cultural background, religious considerations, sure, all these things go into planning out those food choices. And budgetary considerations. Sometimes if you're not the main shopper in your family, you may not realize how expensive fresh fruits, vegetables, meats, dairy, all these categories can be at the grocery store. And so sometimes our budgets are limiting, and we may not be able to get the best, we may not be able to get organic if we want to, because generally they're a little bit more expensive. Focus on meeting food group needs with nutrient-dense foods and beverages. Definitely stay within certain types of calorie limitations there, and try to watch out for those added sugars. And we're going to see that as we go through some of the other chapters, but added sugars, definitely watch out for saturated fats. We'll talk about what that means as we get a little further into the course. Sodium, of course, and alcohol can be problematic as well. So what does a healthy dietary pattern look like? Well, table 3.4, if you've got, if you're looking at the textbook, you can kind of find some more suggestions there. This is just kind of a quick snapshot. It's going to, and we've already mentioned a lot of this already. It's going to include variety of different types of vegetables. It's going to include fruits. It's going to include grains. It's going to include dairy products, especially those that are either fat-free or low-fat. It's going to include protein sources, whether it's meat sources or vegetable sources. It's going to even include oils, fats, especially those that are vegetable-based oils or polyunsaturated oils, such as olive oil. Notice that all of the food groups are represented here. And so that's an important concept there. Limiting things like added sugars, limiting things like saturated fats, limiting things like sodium to reasonable levels there. So the last couple of things we'll look at are how specific populations vary and their health, nutrition, dietary patterns and recommendations. And so, for example, infants, newborns from newborn up to about 6 months is recommended to consume only breast milk or infant formula. The infant formula is recommended to be fortified with iron. There's that word fortification again. So fortified with iron, because it is a very important mineral to have. Beyond that, 6 months up to a year, it's okay to start slowly kind of introducing things like nutrient-dense foods in addition to the breast milk and or formula. It's okay, definitely check with your pediatrician, your healthcare provider, but it's usually safe to start consuming, potentially allergenic foods, making sure that the toddler or the infant there is getting, plenty of iron and zinc in their diet. Be careful though about added sugars, and so just kind of look at the food products or the drinks and things, and make sure that if you're starting fruit juices, maybe not quite this early, but if you're starting fruit juice, make sure you're looking for things like how much added sugar is there. 12 months up to 23, cow's milk is okay at this juncture here. Variety of low sodium, nutrient dense foods, and of course not consuming those added sugars or that are found in especially beverages. 2 to 18, limit consumption of foods and beverages that contain those added sugars. Again, they're kind of stressing that because a lot of times we're missing that, or we get too many of those added sugars that we don't even think about are there. Like again, fruit juices, they've added quite a bit sometimes to sweeten a particular fruit juice. On the opposite kind of the extreme, I guess, or timetable there, adults 60 years and older should definitely be making sure they're getting adequate amounts of protein-rich foods. Being careful about that added sugar, saturated fats, sodium, because all of these can affect the cardiovascular health. Making sure you're focusing on nutrients that you need, especially things like potassium. Calcium, of course, is very important. Vitamin D we'll talk about a little more later, but that's very important to help our bodies retain calcium. And so those kind of go together. Plenty of dietary fiber and certain B vitamins, especially B12, which really helps with our overall metabolism. All right, so that's part 1 for chapter 3, and we'll be looking at part 2 shortly. Thanks, guys.